we're going to talk about case structure. So this is how we're going to actually be debating, so we need to make sure we know the different pieces of the case that we're using. So, constructive speeches. We talked about how a debate round is formatted, and so constructive speeches are the first speech that each team gives in a round. And so constructive speeches always include a pre-written case. So there's always a pre-written case for the constructive speeches. And so it's important for us to keep that in mind as we're working on both affirmative and negative cases. So we're going to have to think about what types of things we want to pre-write. And that's going to be what we'll work on in the second half of today's class. We're going to actually work on starting to write cases. So the parts of the affirmative case. So as you were reading through that case that we looked at the beginning of class, there's all sorts of different pieces. First, you start out usually with some sort of opening quotation or an introduction of some sort. And basically that's just trying to set the stage for what's going to happen over the rest of that speech. Next, you're going to have the resolution, and this just reminds us what we're actually talking about. So this is the resolution that we're debating when we go to the tournament in a couple weeks. Then we talk about definitions, and we clarify what the resolution means. We have a resolutional analysis. We then talk about our value, and the value is what we actually think we can best uphold this resolution with some specific value. The value criterion, which we just talked about on Monday, and that's how do we weigh whether or not a specific value is or isn't important in the round, and whether or not we've reached a threshold of that value or not. So that's the kind of question we're asking with the value criterion. Then we have our thesis. The thesis is going to be some sort of statement, and this isn't a requirement for your case, but it's often kind of just like a thesis in a paper, where you're saying, here's kind of what I'm going to prove over the rest of this case. Then you have your contentions, and that's where the meat of the case is. That's where you're actually proving that you reach the value through some level of criterion. And so that's the real part of the case that we're going to be focusing on, especially today. So, how are these sections important? We're going to talk just a little bit about each one of these sections and why they're important. The first is the opening, the introduction. This just sets the stage in your favor. The goal of your opening is to try to have some quotation that provides sympathetic views to what you're saying. So if you think that the abuse of illegal drugs ought to be treated as a matter of public health, not criminal justice, you're going to quote some individual or some study that says treating it as public health is good for society, or it makes us a more just society, or it makes us a better world. You're going to quote that at the beginning just to set the stage. The resolution. Now, everyone knows what the resolution is, but we kind of, as a formality, we always put it inside of our case. In some ways, it just reminds us what the focus of the debate round is going to be. Because the resolution is the focus of the debate, and so we put it in our case at the very beginning, after we've kind of set the stage, just to remind us that that's what we're focusing on in this debate round. Next, we have a resolutional analysis, and this just clarifies what the resolution does and does not require. So, if you were debating this resolution, you might want to very clearly lay out that, you see, I don't have to prove that all use of illegal drugs should be treated as a matter of public health. I'm just talking about the abuse, and that's going to be the crux of this case, and we're just going to talk about a subset of drug users who are actually abusing them, and how the world would better reach the value I propose if we put those who abuse illegal drugs into the public health system instead of criminal justice. I'm not saying that we should make all drugs legal. I'm not saying that we should shut down the criminal justice system for drugs. What I'm saying is, for abusers of illegal drugs, that's not the best way forward. And so, trying to set something like that up with your resolutional analysis just kind of hones in what the debate is actually going to be about, and kind of helps everybody focus on what we're talking about. Then you have definitions, which narrow the debate. They narrow the debate, and they clarify what we're debating. So we may not know what the word abuse actually means, or we may be worried that there's a lot of different ways to define the word abuse, and so narrowing it would mean abuse might be people who have, a psychological issue and can't stop taking drugs. And so that would mean it's not just somebody who uses an illegal drug once a month. Even though we might consider any overuse of illegal drugs to be abuse, you're trying to say, I'm going to look at addicts only and consider addicts to be abusers. And so that's going to narrow it, and it also might clarify maybe what public health or what criminal justice actually means. Because there's a lot of potential things that public health could mean. Maybe that means the hospital. Maybe public health is what we do with people who are already inside the prison system. I don't know the answer to that, and that's part of what your definitions are going to help us decide. And that's going to clarify what we're actually debating, so that everybody in the room knows that we're not talking about one thing, we are talking about another thing. And nobody gets confused over the course of the round. Then you have the value framework, and this is the stuff that we talked about on Monday, and this is the value and value criterion. This sets the ground rules. It sets the ground rules because on Monday we talked about how the value is the real goal and what you're trying to aim for in a debate round. And so if somebody is talking about human life and then the other team gets up and talks about people being happy, well, that's interesting, but if the value we're talking about is human life, then happiness is kind of irrelevant for that specific debate round. And so it sets the ground rules, and then the value criterion is our measuring stick to decide whether or not we've reached that value. And anything that doesn't fall into those categories is kind of outside the resolution. It would be the same as if you walked into the round and started talking about whether or not short or tall basketball players were preferable. While that's a really interesting debate and one that we had a lot of fun with on Monday, it's not the one that we're actually supposed to be debating right now. And so that would be irrelevant. It's outside the ground rules we're playing under. It also provides us a framework for the judge to decide the round. A framework for the judge to decide the round. So again, we know that each debate round is going to be decided by a judge based on who can uphold this resolution or show it to be false, but also who has better values and who better reaches the values that they're claiming. And so this is a framework for the judge. The value and the value criterion give the judge a framework to say, well, the affirmative team better reach this value this way and the negative team better reach this value this way. Which one wins? Probably based on the value criterion. Maybe if it's we want more people to live longer, then the value of human life is going to be upheld by whichever one of these things gives people a longer life. Next you have a thesis, and we've already talked about this. This explains what affirming will actually mean. And so again, this might be another place similar to the resolutional analysis where you can set up for the judge and for everyone listening to the round that if you affirm this resolution, judge, you are not necessarily voting for us to eliminate the criminal justice system. An affirmative ballot simply means that you are saying that people who abuse illegal drugs are better treated by public health than by criminal justice. This is often even more valuable for a negative case, when you have a thesis, because you can clarify to the judge and say, Judge, I'm not debating that criminal justice is the only way. Maybe you're saying criminal justice and public health need to be used in tandem. And that's not affirming this resolution. As the negative, I'm not affirming this resolution. I think that we need both of them in equal measure, or maybe just a little more criminal justice, but we also need a lot more public health than we have right now. And that could be a way to negate the resolution and for the negative team to try to say you can still cast a negative ballot without explicitly saying I just want criminal justice. And finally we have contentions, and contentions will support the value and the criterion and uphold the resolution. So contentions are where we start to tell stories. That's where we bring in evidence and we start to say, here's why going with this value and is the better one given this resolution. And so we tell a story about an individual or a study about individuals who are in the criminal justice system who their abuse of illegal drugs is getting worse. Maybe people have better access to some illegal drugs when they're incarcerated than when they aren't. And then maybe we have another story talking about treating it as public health actually gives people a longer life and it gives them a greater odds of coming off of their addiction and being productive members of society. If those are the stories that we're telling, and maybe our value has something to do with the betterment of society as a whole, then that would be really good parts of our contention. And so that's how we try to build our contentions up. That's really the meat of the case. It's not going to be focused on just kind of telling me whether this resolution is or isn't specific about the word abuse. We're going to be focusing more on these values and then looking at these contentions, and we start to say, see, here's examples from the world that show how affirming or negating this resolution is the best world for us to live in.